Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, part of our series, Pathways to Prosperity, Building Strong Communities for Business Success. We want to thank our sponsor, Kennebunk Savings, for presenting this series and making it possible. Today we have a very important topic, especially for the state of New Hampshire. We're going to discuss why employers must create caregiver-friendly workplaces. So at some point in our lives, we all need to be cared for and need to assume the role of caregiver. The US and especially New Hampshire faces a caregiver crisis of immense proportion. Support for individuals, families, and care workforce is severely lacking, while we're entering an elder boom. The baby boomers turning 65 or older by 2030. That's 10,000 people in this country turning 65 every day. Their millennial children are far from ready for this elder care crisis, and they have the prospect of finding themselves in the sandwich generation, made up of those caring for elderly parents and young children at the same time. Caregiver-friendly workplace provides the flexibility and support to help employees keep their jobs while also taking care of their loved ones. We have two experienced speakers on this topic that we would like to welcome. Jennifer Rabellier is the co-director at the UNH Center on Aging and Community Living, providing expertise in areas of program design, implementation, and oversight. She has over 20 years experience working on programs for various populations in community-based settings, and is currently a coordinator for the New Hampshire Alliance for Healthy Aging, which prioritizes supporting New Hampshire's family caregivers. Dick Cheverfield, Dick retired in 2011, but he's a very active retiree. He retired as the state director of AARP Pennsylvania. Dick has held leadership roles at AARP New Hampshire and New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services. His retirement from state government was the capstone of 35-year career working in the fields of aging, child welfare, and human services. We welcome both our speakers, and I'll hand over the presentation to you, Jennifer, and I'll share your slides.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the warm introduction. We're pleased to be here with you today and really pleased to partner with the New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility to offer you this webinar on creating workplaces that support employees who are also caregivers. So as was mentioned, I am Jennifer Rabelais, and I'll be presenting today with Dick Cheverfield. And you heard a lot about us already in that brief bio. So what I want to add specifically, though, is that both Dick and I, while we have many roles, both current and in the past, are really here today as part of our work with the New Hampshire Alliance for Healthy Aging. And so Dick is currently the chair of the New Hampshire Alliance for Healthy Aging Steering Committee and also sits on our caregiving work group. And then I, in my role as co-director of the Center on Aging and Community Living, lead a small team from the center that provides support to the New Hampshire Alliance for Healthy Aging. So what I want to do to start us off is just provide a quick overview of what you can expect from our time today. And so I'm going to start off giving a little bit of a background on and some information on the Alliance for Healthy Aging, why this topic matters to us, and why we think it's relevant for you as businesses and employers. I will share some information and data on what family caregiving looks like, both nationally and here in New Hampshire. And it will include some information on the cost of caregiving to caregivers and what we know about the impact on their role as employees as caregivers. So Dick will then talk about the costs for employers associated with employees who are also caregiving, as well as he will share tools and resources for building practices that support employees that are caregiving. And then we'll end our time today with question and answer. So I hope that throughout our time, that if comments or reflections or questions come up for you, that you put them in either the chat or the Q&A function that you can find at the bottom of your screen. And we look forward to hearing some of those comments and questions at the end of our time. So next slide, please. So as I said, I want to provide a quick overview of the Alliance for Healthy Aging. So the New Hampshire Alliance for Healthy Aging is a statewide coalition of stakeholders that focuses on the health and well-being of older people across our state. It currently engages over 540 individuals, representing over 290 groups and/or organizations across the state. So the Alliance for Healthy Aging was formally branded in 2018 after several years' work to convene leaders in the aging network, community leaders, individuals, and businesses to establish a shared agenda for creating communities across New Hampshire that support older people and their families, and also communities that provide a range of choices and supports that advance health, independence, and dignity. So you see that vision here on this slide. I do want to note that while the focus is on creating what we refer to as age-friendly communities, I want to acknowledge that we're all aging. And so this work is really relevant for all of us. And we understand that what is supportive for older people is often supportive for other age groups, such as young adults or young families. So whether we're talking about walkable communities or creating caregiver-friendly employment practices, we know the benefits are often for all of us throughout the lifespan. So again, going back to this slide, I want to just acknowledge that the vision of the Alliance recognizes that supporting the health and well-being of all of us as we age really requires a comprehensive approach. And you can see in this slide, embedded in this vision, there are 6 domains that take into consideration not just the whole person, but the whole social, economic, and physical context for aging in New Hampshire. Next slide, please. To advance the vision that I just spoke about, the Alliance for Healthy Aging has established 5 priority areas. And so I'm not going to go into them in depth, but I do want to just lay them out briefly. And so the 5 priority areas of the Alliance are to build an advocacy infrastructure to support aging issues, to ensure that there are adequate transportation options available for older people and people with disabilities, ensure that there's diverse housing to meet the needs and allow older people choice in which communities they want to live, strengthening the direct care workforce so those paid professionals are available to provide care and allow individuals to remain in their homes of their choice. And then finally, to ensure there are adequate supports to informal, non-paid caregivers. And we seem to be, this may be a known issue, but we seem to be, there we go. Slight glitch with the slides. So we are back up on the slide with the caregiving work group title. In the other direction. Yes, thank you. So what you see on this slide, so the fifth priority area I talked about is ensuring that family caregivers have adequate supports. What you see on this slide are the strategies that we are taking to move the needle in that direction. And so the first one being to increase caregiver self-identification. We're going to talk about the concept of caregiver self-identification throughout our discussion today, but this strategy really is in recognition of the fact that caregivers often don't recognize or see themselves as caregivers. And this does play a role in how you might support them as an employer. So what we know is often if you ask a caregiver if they are caregiving, you might get an answer of no. But if you ask that same individual, are you shopping for someone? Do you pay bills or maybe help clean a family member or friend's home? The answer could then be yes. So there's a disconnect between the tasks of caregiving and the identification of with the role of caregiving. So first and foremost, it's important to understand this when supporting caregivers. Our work in this area includes efforts to promote self-identification. The next strategy I want to lift up is really acting as a convener on caregiving issues. And so this is where the Alliance for Healthy Aging convenes organizations, initiatives, and professionals who support caregiving in New Hampshire with the goal of aligning work, understanding better what is occurring in New Hampshire, and identifying gaps in supports for family caregivers. And then the third strategy is the strategy to increase caregiver-friendly workplaces by sharing tools and information. And often that takes the form of presentations like this one. So I do want to acknowledge that we partner closely with AARP through this work and not only use their wonderful data sources and their studies from the AARP Public Policy Institute to help us understand the picture of caregiving nationally and in New Hampshire, but we also share some of the many tools that they have developed to advance caregiver-friendly workplaces. So you'll see that reflected and you'll see that acknowledgement in our slides today. Next slide, please. So I want to take a minute, I want to spend a minute to talk about why this is important. So understanding that as a member of New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility, you all are committed to improving not just your workplaces, but also your communities and the environment. So besides doing good, I want to highlight some of the benefits to your organization. So I'll start with caregiving. So we know that caregiving responsibilities can create stress and emotional strain, which can often lead to reduced productivity and engagement. So by providing caregiver supports and benefits, organizations can show their commitment to supporting employees' well-being and help reduce stress, as well as enhance work-life balance. This can really foster a positive work environment and result in higher employee morale, engagement, and retention. So in a competitive job market, it's a way for organizations to differentiate themselves to attract and retain top talent. We know that by offering comprehensive caregiver benefits, really demonstrates a commitment by an organization to the employee's holistic needs. And can distinguish the organization as an employer of choice. So potential candidates is particularly those that are currently in a caregiving role may be even more attracted to an employer that values and supports their unique circumstances. Another benefit that I want to highlight is that integrating caregiver benefits into employee programs can promote diversity and inclusion by recognizing and supporting diverse caregiving responsibilities that employees have. It acknowledges that employees have different needs, and come to work with many aspects of themselves. And it creates an inclusive culture that values caregiving roles irrespective of gender, age, or familial relationship. It also fosters a sense of belonging, strengthening employee loyalty and collaboration. Employees who feel supported in their caregiving roles are also more likely to remain focused and motivated at work. So, by providing resources such as flexible work arrangements, counseling services, or access to other resources, and we're going to go into this much more later, what some of these resources might look like. But by providing these resources, companies can enable employees to manage their caregiving responsibilities effectively. And this, in turn, as we've already noted, can lead to increased productivity, lower absenteeism rates, and basically just overall improved performance. And so finally, the last benefit that I want to, or the last two that I really want to talk about, or is that, I acknowledging that companies that prioritize caregiving benefits often cultivate a positive brand image by doing so, both internally and externally. So, employees that appreciate the supports that are offered often become advocates for their company. This positive sentiment extends well beyond the workplace and can attract potential customers or funders or investors who value organizations with a strong commitment to employee well-being and social responsibility. And finally, we know that caregiving builds invaluable skills that caregivers bring back into the workplace, whether that be skills around prioritizing patience or teamwork. We know that there are many positive things learned through a caregiving role that can be brought back into a job role. So next slide, please. So, what does the picture of family caregiving look like? And who are we talking about? So, I just want to spend a few minutes providing some data on what the picture of family caregiving looks like. Starting out with nationally, according to a study by AARP conducted in 2020, there are over 53 million Americans caring for an adult or a child with special needs, with 48 million of those caregiving for adults. So this translates to 1 in 5 adults who are providing care for someone. We know that 47% of those are providing care for someone 75 years or older. We also know from this report that the average caregiver provides care for 4 years and spends up to 25 hours a week providing care. So in New Hampshire, we know that there are 168,000 residents providing unpaid care to an adult relative or a friend, and that this is valued at $2.8 billion. Next slide, please. So who is the average caregiver? What does a caregiver look like? And so I want to acknowledge that the face of caregiving has often been seen as a middle-aged woman in her 40s or in her 50s. But what we know is that the demographics of a caregiver are rapidly changing. Um, Caregiving remains an activity that occurs among all generations, all racial ethnic groups, income or education levels, family types, gender identities, or sexual orientations. As was noted at the beginning of the webinar, it is likely that most of us will be a caregiver at some point in our lives. So the current picture of caregiving includes caregivers, 25% of caregivers are under the age of 35. We now know that 40% and rising are men. 24% of caregivers are not just caring for one individual, but are caring for 2 or more people at the same time. And 10 to 15% of caregivers are caring for non-relatives, so caring for a friend or a neighbor as opposed to a family member. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we also know there's a great cost of caregiving to the caregiver themselves. In 2021, it was estimated that the value of unpaid caregiving across the nation was over $600 billion, with the average out-of-pocket expense for caregivers per year at, you can see on this slide here, $6,954. We see here that there's a financial cost for leaving employment due to caregiving responsibilities, with this cost being higher for women than men in large part because women tend to leave the workforce earlier and more often than men. Next slide, please. So what does this all mean for employers? Some additional data points. We know that 1 out of every 6 employees is providing some level of care for a family member or a friend. We also know that 80% of employed caregivers who were surveyed reported that caregiving negatively impacts their workplace productivity. Most also reported that they had not identified yet that they were a caregiver to their employer, and cited the reason being it was out of fear of being viewed as less committed or less able to perform job duties. Next slide, please. So this slide shows some of the ways that caregivers report their work is impacted or affected. And so you can see here on the bottom lower part of the graph, the largest one, 50% report having to go in late, leaving early, or taking time off. We also see, between 10 and 15% citing needing to reduce work hours or taking less demanding jobs, as well as needing to take a leave of absence. And then you can see other impacts from turning down promotions, retiring early, to even getting fired as a result of filling their role of caregiving. So since oftentimes, as we just discussed, caregivers don't always disclose their responsibilities because they're afraid of consequences or the negative impact that it could have on their careers, it's really important, at least initially, for employers to build a culture of support, empathy, collaboration, and belonging to help promote openness among their employees, to allow them to identify their problems and their challenges, both inside the workplace and outside the workplace. And this is really the first step needed for companies to give effective support. So now I'm going to transition over to Dick, and he's going to talk more about what this culture looks like, as well as other ways that employers can support or lift up caregiver-friendly employment practices.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. As Jennifer said, we're going to transition from the perspective in terms of the demographics and characteristics of caregivers. Now we're going to move into the realm of the employer and the interface with their employees. I'm going to give you the answers to the quiz at the end of the presentation, and I want you to take these down so you're able to be successful in answering the questions. It's organizational culture. It starts at the top. Managers and supervisors. Census, that is knowing your employees. Communications, and written policies. Those are some of the themes that we'll touch upon, and effectively you know that we won't have a quiz, but if I were giving you a quiz, those would be the answers to those questions, to the questions. When you take a look at this slide, hidden employer costs, effectively, some of the ramifications of caregivers working in the work environment, and not only caregivers. I think when you think of caregivers, we're focusing in on caring for an older adult, but there are a lot of parents out there that are working to provide care for their children. So that effectively what we're focusing in on in this particular slide is about $6.3 billion in workday interruption. So if you're looking at the bottom line of an organization and the dollar-wise, it has a significant impact. And then we go on to identify that if you're losing employees, then you have to replace them, and there's a cost associated with that. So these are all costs that are associated with the operation of a business. The last one that I'll just point out here, 8% healthcare costs. There were some studies done by MetLife that when they looked at caregivers in the workplace versus non-caregivers, that there was a driver of about 8% in terms of cost increases for those for the healthcare of people who are in that role of a caregiver. And that amounts to about $13 billion a year. So you can see if we're looking at it from an accounting standpoint, from a fiscal endpoint, there is an impact that financially is felt by businesses, organizations, and institutions across the country. We'll go on to the next slide right now. I characterize this slide as my model slide, benefits to employers. Wanting to take a look at what might be a model that we can employ at the operational level of a business that will help them to deal more effectively with providing supports to their employees who are caregivers. And what we have identified and what a lot of the work that has been done around this issue is a caregiver-friendly workplace. If we can really address the environment, the culture of an organization, then we want to develop a model that is caregiver friendly. And what does that enhance? What does that enhance within the organization? It maximizes productivity, improves employee physical and emotional health. And if we had more time, we would delve into this a little bit more. But on the whole, the employed caregiver and that caregiving role really, it has an adverse impact on the physical and emotional well-being of that person. And that, in fact, is one of the drivers of increased health costs. Attract and retain. This is very, very important. I think in today's world and in the business world, as I sit on the sidelines watching it, there's more and more demand for staff to come on and fill positions within organizations. So by moving to a caregiving-friendly workplace, by beginning to address that, it enhances the ability to attract people and to retain people. There was one citing of Glassdoor recruiting. They were interviewing new recruits for new positions, and as part of the exit process, they asked them what was most important. And they said it was the culture of an organization versus salary. I grew up at a time when salary was pretty important, but in today's world, the younger recruit is really looking for the culture of an organization and the philosophy of that organization and how it supports me as an individual in carrying out my professional responsibility. And lastly, if we go with that model of what we call a caregiving-friendly workplace, it reduces healthcare costs and other indirect costs. And as Jennifer has said, I can almost guarantee you that we're all going to be in a position of caregiving. And hopefully most of us won't have to be in a position of being a care recipient. But effectively, we have to be conscious of that. And anything that we can do to strengthen the system that supports caregivers, the better off we all are going to be in the future. If we go to the next slide, as we transition to the work environment and the employer and look at what we might consider the appropriate model, that being a caregiver-friendly environment, I think each business, organization, institution really needs to really look at researching what's going to be appropriate for them. And the title of this slide being Create a Culture of Awareness. A culture that is worker care friendly. And so a lot of activity has to go on if you're going to be effective in building the kind of environment, the kind of work culture that you want, that's responsive to your organization and the people that work within your organization. These are some of the things that you need to take a look at. Number one size fits all approach. It doesn't. There's no one size that fits all approach. If you're going to be successful in developing this culture of awareness, this culture of caring, you need to develop a company-wide understanding of caregiver challenges. That's an important one. I think sometimes we really don't fully understand what a caregiver goes through. As Jennifer said in some of the earlier slides, that a number of caregivers don't really recognize that they're a caregiver. They just do it because that's their parent, that's their loved one, and that's something that they really need to do. But we have to, as organizations and businesses, really understand what that caregiver challenges are. It could be fiscal, it could be emotional, it could be physical, it could be work-related in terms of capacity to get the job done. Be aware of how caregivers see themselves. Again, this is important in the sense that a lot of caregivers don't see themselves as valued. And in a sense, they don't see themselves as really contributing to the degree that they really would like to agree. So we need to be aware of caregivers, how they see themselves, and really understand the caregiver. Take a holistic approach to employee well-being. There's a continuum of options. And when we look at childcare, we look at elder care, people with disabilities care, there should be a continuum. And sometimes there isn't the smoothness to that pathway in terms of benefits and approaches that organizations are engaged in. Prepare managers to assist. To me, this is when I look at this stuff, that's one of the key important ones. Managers are a reflection of leadership. And managers are the ones that interface with the caregiver employee all of the time. So we really need to look at that interface and how we can strengthen that within our organization. And to be sensitive to the stigma of caregiving really relates to above in terms of how caregivers see themselves. They feel that there's a stigma attached to it. They feel some pressure from other employees because they have this caregiving responsibility and may have to leave work early or come in late, whatever the situation is. So understand the environment of your organization as it relates to caregiving. And there are a few other things I think that are important to consider when you're moving toward the research end of understanding your organization within the context of being caregiver friendly. Conduct a census. Know your employees. And this isn't on the slide, but I think this is very important. We had worked with another organization a little bit earlier on, and they said they really didn't know their employees. How many of them were caregiving, how many of them had child care issues, et cetera. So it's going to be important to do that census to really understand your employees, and an organizational assessment on the right-hand side of this slide is our workplace culture caregiving friendly. It's a sort of a self-administered reflection on where our organization is in the context of being a caregiver-friendly environment. When you're doing the research in terms of whether moving in one direction or another around care-friendly workplace, research other like businesses and what's going on and what they're doing. Research information about caregiving. Explore online resources. Have conversations with employees and caregiving. This is an important one. We really need to be aggressive in communicating with our employees to understand what they see their needs are and what some of the issues are that they're going through so that we fully understand the caregiver, employee, and the environment of their work and how it impacts them. So research, I think, is the ultimate nub of this slide, and really understanding where your organization is and how best you want to move forward if you want to engage in really moving towards a caregiver-friendly work environment. We'll go on to the next slide right now. And I characterize this slide, and the title isn't up there, but what can employers do? I took it from the work that you all do with business and social responsibility, and one of your values was we support from ideas to action, And I say this slide really represents where we were in the previous slide in terms of thinking about it and doing research on it. We're going to move from the ideas that we have to some actionable steps that we can take. And this is a slide that really shows things that are no cost, low cost, more cost. And effectively, we're not, at least I'm not promoting, high cost end, low cost end, no cost end, but whatever is appropriate to your organization, and consider some of the options that are available to you. And I'm going to go through a few of them right now that aren't really reflected in total on the board. Number one, an organization has to really prioritize being a caregiver-friendly workplace. Is this something attitudinally, organizationally, that we want to move forward on really strengthening our capacity of becoming care-friendly, or just strengthening that work as care-friendly organization? The leader sets the tone and responsiveness of the organization. You mentioned the C-suite a little earlier when we were chatting. The leadership has to be behind it. The staff, the managers in an organization are basically a reflection of leadership, and there has to be a level of ownership if you're going to be successful in moving forward and making some changes within your organization that support the concept of a caregiver-friendly work environment. Have written policies. This is one, and as I read the literature, becomes very important. It really, and I'll get into that in a slide in a minute, so I'll leave it at that, but written policies are very important. It's not left up to the imagination. It's pretty much concrete and right there. Clearly communicate with your employees, organize support groups, educational workshops. We talked a little bit earlier about a care survey. Who are your caregivers, and what's their knowledge of the organizational supports that you have? Identify a resource point within your organization. Some of you may have a human resources or an employee assistance program, but for some smaller organizations, they may not. But identify a point where people can turn to get information and move their concerns and questions forward. Does the organization understand the joys and challenges of caregiving? We talked a little bit about this earlier. This is an important one. We really have to almost understand the shoes that a caregiver employee is walking in. So those are some of the things that, as you're beginning to move from ideas to action, some of the things that you can do, a lot of it is really no cost or low cost, and I think you need to move forward with that. I'm going to go through a couple of no-cost ones. Share information about resources. That's easy because you have organizations like the Alliance for Healthy Aging that can help you gather some of that information so that you have it available for your staff. Send out a human resource letter. Again, some of you may not have a human resource department, but communicate. Some of it is written, some of it is verbal, but make sure that you communicate with your staff. That really enhances the capacity to build that caregiver-friendly workplace. Be a boss who asks. Walk around. Know your people. Show your people that you're interested and care about some of the tasks and issues that they have to deal with on a day-to-day group. So those are some of the no-cost And we're going to be suggesting some material that you can look at later that really goes into a whole array of different options that are available to an organization in terms of building this culture of awareness, this culture that's a caregiver-friendly environment. We're going to go on to the next step. Excuse me, the next slide. This one is, as it says, small employer face unique challenges related to caregiving. As we started off, we said no one size fits all. The smaller employers, and when I was more actively involved in working in the systems here in New Hampshire, I used to have the opportunity to speak to a lot of people. And one of the issues was always around that 95%, I don't know if it's still the same in the businesses for social responsibility know better than I, but 95% are small businesses here in New Hampshire, and a very small percentage are large businesses. So we're going to share with you a guide that really focuses on small employers. But there are some challenges that are part of small business. Fewer staff, fewer resources that are available. You may not have a formal HR department. Those are some of the challenges that face a smaller organization. Again, one size does not fit all. For a larger organization, you may have more flexibility. For a smaller organization, you have to consider that and look at what becomes appropriate for you to take on in terms of your responsibility of developing that caregiver-friendly environment. Just as an aside, and there was some study and some research that was done that in small businesses, they felt that about 70% of their employees were caregivers. Now, this isn't specific to New Hampshire. This is a national work that was done, and that the small business leadership felt that caregiving was important, and that they feel that it's important in the workplace. Then they also had referenced the fact some of the small businesses had written policies, and that helped them in terms of addressing some of the issues related to caregivers who were also their employees. We'll go on to the next slide, which is workplaces with caregiving policy are the most supportive. Mentioned this up front. Written policy is very important. It brings clarity to the work environment and brings a certain level of fairness and productivity. And the benefits of having written policy increases communication, transparency, and productivity, strengthens employee morale, loyalty, and promotes fairness. The fairness one is, I sort of underscored that when I look at this slide, is that when you have it in writing, when it's down, it's not Dick having this advantage or Jennifer having that advantage. It creates an environment of fairness. And it also, a written policy reduces workplace costs and turnover. Again, it's because it provides clarity within that work environment. Written policies help to attract new talent. Again, it's something that a recruit can look at in terms of an organization's operation, et cetera, and helps them to make their decision about whether they want to move forward with this work environment. And it provides a better workplace balance. So again, the nub of this one is that policy is very important. Written policy is very, very important in terms of an organization and helping people to understand what their advantages in terms of working within your particular organization. The next slide, really, the next two slides really deal with resources that are available. And this is online, and you can see the website listed at the bottom of it, but it's a free tool and resource to help employers in supporting their working caregivers. It provides a wealth of information, assessments, how-to guides, pull out resources and checklists, videos, but gives you a lot of information that you need to do, especially in your research phase, where you want to grow your caregiver worker-friendly environment, or you're in the beginning of looking at how you can become more caregiver-friendly. This deals principally with some of the larger organization structures, but again, it's very, very helpful, very, very good, and gives you a lot of good information so that you are able to make the best decisions for your organization. The next slide, it relates to a small business guide. Again, we talked a little bit earlier about the unique challenges sometimes of smaller businesses, but AARP and its partners put together this small business guide that is very valuable in terms of helping the smaller businesses look at their work environment in the context of a caregiver-friendly work environment. So those are two of the principal resources. Both of them are online. And I will also give a plug, having worked for AARP for 9 years, that just going to aarp.org/caregiving becomes an invaluable resource too, in terms of as you look at your work environment and what you all can do to strengthen that caregiver worker-friendly environment. The last slide is, I'm not going to say too much of it, but it just reinforces who Jennifer is and who Dick Sheverfields is, and that we're always willing and available to be an asset, hopefully, in terms of some of the conversations and discussions that you all have around a caregiver worker-friendly environment and how you can support your employees who are caregivers. Again, thank you for the opportunity, and we look forward to answering any questions. And I'm going to turn it over to Zena right now.
And this is your chance as an audience to ask the experts, and we have them in the room. So if you have any questions, specifics, or comments, you can either ask to unmute or pop your question into the Q&A or chat, and we'll give it to our speakers. Thank you both. We want to thank Dick and Jennifer for taking the time and providing all these resources. You will be getting a follow-up email with the recording and the resources along with the PDF of the slides. I'm going to give people the chance to ask their questions.
While we're waiting one more moment, I'm going to put at least one other additional resource in the chat. And so we talked a lot about data and how we know what the picture of caregiving looks like. And so there is a infographic from that report we referenced, Valuing the Invaluable. So I'm just putting that link in there, as well as there's a much larger full report that I will share that link for in case anybody has interest in digging in a little deeper and understanding really what the picture of caregiving looks like.
Any questions you may have? And I was wondering if the no cost is the approach for small businesses. Is that what you would suggest that they start with, or that toolkit that you provided has more custom? Since you are correct, Dick, there's a lot of small businesses in New Hampshire and they face resource crunch. So are the approaches more flexible times, understanding, and did remote work at all improve the situation?
Well, telecommuting, remote work has had a benefit in terms of the work environment. And that's one of the suggestions that comes up that really enhances a caregiver-friendly workplace, that capacity. The two things that, you know, and I get carried away with myself when I'm talking, you know, and but there are two priority areas that caregivers have suggested in terms of what can happen in a work environment. One is manager understanding, And we didn't have a lot of time to go into that, but about the caregiver really feels that about a third of the third of the caregivers said their supervisor manager didn't know that they were a caregiver. And then there were about another 13 or 15% said they weren't sure. But what came out of some of the work that's been done by the various enterprises out there is that understanding, the manager's understanding, the supervisor understanding and support is so critically important. The second variable that people prioritize was flexibility. So, if you look at cost, no cost, the manager understanding and support, there's really no cost other than the training. And it's so critically important to train managers and supervisors. And the flexibility, it's the ability to have a flexible work schedule, and having unpaid leave or paid leave, but with no attitude. And that's a term that's often used, no attitude that, this is just something that has to be done. And because I'm taking a little more time, I don't want you to think of me as being a sloth or a sloucher or whatever it might be. But the supervisors understanding and support and flexibility were the one and two in terms of things that can be done at a business. I just think the no cost one is getting the leadership of the business, if it's a small business or a large business, because their attitude really makes a difference in terms of how employees feel about themselves, whether they're caregivers or not caregivers.
And do you have like solid case studies or examples of companies that you've worked with that have noticed the change since implementing these practices?
Well, I think, and Jennifer, you can jump in. Because I don't get paid for anything, so I can get in trouble very easily. But the books, the two guidelines will really highlight some of those businesses and organizations. And I think if you, and I can't think of them off the top of my head, but if you would think of larger organizations and corporations that play a leadership role, they're out there.
Mm-hmm.
They're on the cutting edge. And I look at the New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility as being on the cutting edge. When I look at your material, when I look at the commitments that you make, when I look at the various reports that come out, they really speak a lot to where the head and the attitude is of the membership of your organization. One organization, and I don't think I'll get in trouble, that we have worked with extensively is Northeast Delta Dental. And we worked with Connie Roy-Sazowski. She was one of our panelists when we did some of the earlier presentations. And, in my mind, they were on the cutting edge. And we did Tom Raffio's radio program. And in preparation for that, I read his book. I said, I'm not going to take the risk of going on and not having a little bit of familiarity. When I read that book, I said, boy, I can see why they're at the cutting edge. I can see why they're a caregiver-friendly organization. But, that's the one we've had a little bit more experience, but there are a lot of them. And if you look at the material that's out there, one of the points that I was looking at a little bit earlier in preparation for this is they're saying, really, businesses have come a long way in terms of their attention to the issue of caregiving. And, in today's world, where the staffing issues are so challenging, it's incumbent, I think, upon businesses really to have that sensitivity. But in any event, I don't know, Jennifer, if you are aware of any other companies or...
Yeah, sure. I will jump in on a couple of things briefly, recognizing the time. So going back to that slide, about the resources in expanding from no cost, low cost to high cost. So I think it's really important to think of what we see as in the no cost as the starting point, right? So building that culture, building those supports, offering those resources are critical to lifting up anything you see in that low cost or more cost columns, right? Because if you don't have a culture where people feel comfortable to talk about the fact that they're a caregiver, they're not going to access those resources that you built into your benefit package. So really think of it in terms of that way. And there's a lot that can happen just within that column of low cost supports, that can really provide so much support to a caregiver. And then circling back around to the question, we have been, with relation to, case studies and organizations we have partnered with, as Dick mentioned, we have been fortunate enough to partner with a few organizations, Northeast Delta Dental being one, have lifted up practices from LL Bean and Badger. There are a number of organizations that are really striving to create practices that support their employees who are caregivers. And so, and as Dick said, I'm sure there are many more out there, but there are several that really have made this a strong focus.
It's encouraging to hear a lot of member names when you give the examples, so it's nice to know. And like you said, it's both policy and culture change. You can have the policy in place, but if the culture is not there, it'll be
Absolutely.
policy with an attitude, like Dick said. I like that. So without the attitude, the culture change as well. Before we leave you, I wanted to just share a few future opportunities that may be relevant to people. Part of the caregiver challenges are the mental well-being in the workplace, and we have an upcoming webinar February 8th about navigating the mental health system. We have, again, excellent experts. Dr. Matthew Duncan was actually in charge of mental well-being for employees at Dartmouth Health, and he's an assistant professor of psychiatry. We also have a psychologist and PhD executive coach, Deb LeClaire, from Full Spectrum Wellness. So they're going to go through all the options of what kind of mental health care there is, which ones you could offer, how to navigate and offer the benefits. And the next upcoming webinar for Pathways to Prosperity, where we focus on community issues, we're going to talk about building tomorrow's workforce, collaborative strategies for education and career pathways. How do we work with our education institutions to start these career pathways? And we have great speakers again from Southern New Hampshire University, from the community college system, and from New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. So we encourage you to go to our website and sign up for more in this series. And thank you again for joining us. And I want to take the opportunity to thank our speakers once again for offering this to our members. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.